These haunted hospitals will send a chill down your spine. Unexplained encounters have left even the most enthusiastic paranormal investigators lost for words. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium, now Waverly Hills Sanatorium, located in Louisville, Kentucky, was open to house the growing number of tuberculosis patients. Due to a lack of medical knowledge at the time, patients were kept outside year-round for fresh air, and many had their lungs surgically removed. It is known as one of the most haunted places on Earth, with countless reports of paranormal activity. One person actually shared their experience working there and said, "I worked in the sanatorium for a while, and a lot of residents always, claim to hallucinate either small dogs or, either eating ice cream before they pass away. It's always facility specific too. This place I worked at, I've had about 6 or 7 residents claim to see a little girl eating ice cream and then they pass on later that night. That seems too coincidental for me, right? The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, now home to the WV lobotomy project, the psychiatric hospital was originally built for 250 patients, but the population rose to over 2,000. Conditions were atrocious, and many patients, suffered. Since closing its doors, maintenance staff have reported ghosts as well as other paranormal sightings. Numerous stories and reports of ghostly phenomena have been associated with the asylum. Some of the more prominent stories include a little girl named Lily who is said to roam the halls, a man named Jesse who allegedly passed away in a bathtub there, and other accounts of strange occurrences and apparitions. Now, one person who worked there shared their story on Reddit. They said, "One evening while training for the job, I was on the first floor with a couple coworkers while everyone else was touring upstairs. We were just kind of, wasting time, quietly observing the area. Light from outside was coming in through the windows, casting on the inner hall's wall. In that light, I watched the perfect silhouette of a man from head to hip walk through that light from left to right." She continued to say, in the wee hours of another night, we figured it would be cool to see what would happen if we shut all the doors of the ward. One of the doors, as I was closing it, the knob twisted in on my hand. This person actually shared several different stories of her times there and all of the paranormal stuff that actually went down. And a lot of the comment section was people just sharing their own stories of times that they took a tour there. It's still actually available for tours, so if this has piqued your interest, go book a visit if you dare. Utica State Hospital, New York's first state-run psychiatric facility built in 1843, was characterized by its grandiose revival architecture, but it was not as glamorous as it looked. It is known for the invention of the Utica crib, which is a cage-like bed that was used to restrain patients. Now, those who have explored the facility since its closing have reported hearing screams and seeing faces in the windows. People who have explored the facility both during its active years and after its closure have reported experiencing just other unsettling phenomena as well, that is basically unexplainable. One visitor said they went and heard nothing but weeping and sobbing, which is a common thing apparently. Most people have heard this as well. Now, most have said this place just feels like lingering spirits, and have felt kind of hands brush against them. Most people said they were skeptics before visiting Utica, but now they are full-blown believers. The Danvers State Hospital, built on the same grounds where the Salem witch trials occurred, Danvers State Hospital possesses a very rich history of paranormal lore. It was originally intended to treat the mentally ill with respect and compassion, but this facility quickly became overcrowded and conditions deteriorated. It is said that Arkham Asylum from Batman was based on this institution. Now, the hospital's history of mistreatment, neglect, and trauma is believed to have left a very lasting impact on the land. Even in passing, the patients were not treated with dignity, with many headstones only having numbers instead of names. Now, the immense suffering of the patients is thought to have lingered, contributing to the ghostly activity there. Visitors report a variety of paranormal experiences like screaming, banging, and crying, apparitions and disembodied voices, particularly in the cemeteries there. Now, deep black shadows and grayish mists there also. Many people have said just an overall sensation of being watched or followed. The 2 cemeteries on the property are considered hotspots for paranormal activity, with apparitions and voices just being the most common reports there. Alton Mental Health Center. Now, the Alton Mental Health Center in Illinois is the only facility on this list still in operation today. Once home to cold water treatment, electroshock therapy, and lobotomies, this hospital is notorious for its mistreatment of patients. Like many other hospitals of the time, time, the hospital was also a working farm. It was believed that the work and responsibility was necessary in the treatment of mental health crises. Now, Alton State Hospital became well known for its gorgeous grounds. Patients were allowed to care for the cattle and other animals and plants, which included a well-stocked fish pond, apple orchard, and even tobacco crops. Now, one patient even grew peanuts, which they then sold in Upper Alton. Now, in 1918, the hospital recognized the need for an attached cemetery for those who passed away and were unknown or unclaimed. Later, though, the hospital was even used to house, shell-shocked soldiers coming home from the horrors of World War I. Alton State Hospital earned a reputation, though, for mistreating patients, subjecting them to crude treatments that sometimes lasted hours or even days. Considered cutting-edge treatment at the time would be labeled as torment today. Now, in modern times, many people, have reported paranormal interactions, including 2 nurses who heard a voice whispering to them in the same spot. Staff and visitors report hearing unusual sounds, disembodied voices, slamming doors, and nurses on duty reported hearing a quiet voice that asked them, "Who is that?" Others report the sensation of just being touched, and one photo even showed a bright orb with a vision of a man's face in agony. So while the facility, is still operational today, ghost investigators who managed to visit are told by spirits to get out, promptly being pushed out of the room. Rolling Hills Asylum, located in upstate New York, Rolling Hills Asylum was originally known as the Genesee County Poor Farm. Established in 1827, the Genesee County Poorhouse, originally a working farm, soon became a refuge for some of society's less fortunate. Widows and orphans mingled with the mentally ill, and the unclaimed passed on were buried on the property. With over 1,700 documented demises and hundreds not recorded, it's no wonder, Haunted North America rated it as the second most haunted site in the United States. Throughout its history, it's operated as an orphanage, infirmary, sanatorium, and a nursing home. Now, thousands of unmarked bodies are buried here, and the facility has been featured on many TV shows. Today, it is part of the Haunted History Trail of New York State. One person did share their experience visiting on Reddit and said, "My fiance took me on a 6-hour unguided ghost hunt for my birthday at Rolling Hills Asylum. These photos were taken right when we began our investigation at 8:41 p.m. They have timestamps. I was walking down the first floor hallway past the infamous ramps. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone peek their head out of a room. I checked in the room assuming it was probably someone else exploring. I was alone. I stopped and snapped some pictures after I reviewed the photos later on in the night and realized I had caught a shadow in the doorway. I saw someone poking their head out. Ooh, that gave me chills." Eloise Psychiatric Hospital. Like Rolling Hills, Eloise Psychiatric Hospital was originally a poorhouse located in Wayne County, Michigan. It grew, to become a massive complex with over 50 buildings. It housed a variety of patients, including those with mental illnesses and chronic medical conditions. The hospital was known for its often very brutal and inhumane treatments, including lobotomies, hydrotherapy, and other methods that are now considered unethical. Ghost stories have plagued its reputation, and human remains have been found in jars on the premises. Widely accepted by locals to be haunted, it was sold to basically create a new housing complex in 2018. Many people, including those who have worked at or investigated the property, have reported experiencing paranormal, experiences such as seeing ghosts, hearing whispers, witnessing objects moving on their own. So, the Eloise Asylum has been transformed now into a haunted attraction, offering tours and escape room experiences that, leverage the building's reputation for paranormal activity. The asylum is currently actually being considered for a $4 million renovation, with plans to convert it into a haunted hotel, which further emphasizes this reputation as a haunted location. The Royal Hope Hospital. Last on my list is the Royal Hope Hospital. This hospital was a Spanish military hospital in St. Augustine, Florida, in use from 1784 to 1821. One of the oldest hospitals in Florida, the Royal Hope Hospital has been an integral part of Florida's history since its original building was constructed, all the way back in the late 1700s. St. Augustine is the oldest city in Florida, so it's no surprise that Royal Hope calls, Old City home. Now, the original building was demolished and a replica was later constructed, at which point it was discovered to be built upon a Native American burial ground. Now, there have been many sightings, of ghosts and reports of objects moving on their own. The surgeon's office is actually said to be the most haunted. This room is home to a spirit who likes to grab onto visitors' clothes and refuses to let them go. His grasp is described as basically freezing cold, hard, and forceful. One visitor stated that she could actually feel a large hand gripping her clothing, refusing to let her go. The only way to shake it off was to run out of the room as quickly as possible. Luckily, the clingy spirit didn't follow her out.
Starting off 5th place strong, we've got a narrowly avoided death. This tale takes place when long-term nurse Jenny was placed in charge of caring for an elderly woman with no family who was admitted to the hospital when her husband passed away. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was usually just words that made no sense together. Jenny felt bad for her because ever since she'd arrived, so many of the residents in her area that she, seemed to enjoy spending time with had passed. She put up a picture of each of them next to the pictures of her husband and several others who were probably just family to remember them. Being an extremely empathetic person, Jenny felt sorry for this woman and strived to give her extra attention whenever she could, and formed a bond with the lady. It just seemed so unfair that she had, such luck and kept losing people that she cared about. One day she looked at Jenny and said, plain as day, "Sweetie, I think I'm done now," and handed Jenny a picture. It was a picture of Jenny, and she smiled because it touched her heart that she was so important to the old woman. She passed nearly a week later, and poor Jenny cried for days from the loss. The old lady knew it was the end, and she said goodbye as best she could. Now fast forward to just under 2 years later, when Jenny was talking with a colleague, and that old lady came up in conversation. Her colleague referred to the lady as that crazy, explicit word for a female dog, which seemed very out of character for her, and it shocked and offended Jenny deeply. She expressed this to her colleague, not so nicely, and the lady looked at Jenny with a shocked look and said, "Oh dear, do you not know?" And then proceeded to explain something to Jenny that, she in fact hadn't known. As it turned out, it came out sometime after she had passed that the old lady had killed her husband by poisoning him, and that there was an investigation because it appeared that she had a ritual of befriending someone, obtaining a picture of them, and hiding the picture until she could kill them, usually by poisoning, and then displaying the picture as some sort of a trophy. It was suspected that this may have been the reason for the spike in mortality rate during her stay, and the considerable amount of photos in her collection. The last Jenny heard, the old family photos weren't any relation to the old woman, and the police were trying to ID the individuals and compare them to several cold cases. Sheesh. Thank goodness Jenny survived to tell the tale. In fourth place, time to tell the tale of a rocking bed. Nope, not a rocking horse, rocking chair, or like an ottoman. A bed. I know waterbeds are out of style and like a major safety hazard, but maybe this could inspire them to come back. New nurse Demi was working one of her first ever overnight shifts when a relative of one of her patients raced into the nurse's station, out of breath, screaming that she needed to come quick. Unable to elaborate, saying Demi had to see what she was talking about for herself. Our nurse made her way to the room in question, where this little old lady patient was crying and holding onto the bed for dear life, all while her bed was shaking extremely violently. Now, you're probably thinking that the lady was the one causing all that shaking, but apparently she was this frail, practically emaciated older lady who didn't even possess the strength to rattle the rails. The ward only had 2 other patients in it, and everyone in there was huddled in a corner, shaking in fright until it eventually subsided. Apparently that particular ward was rarely used, and the bed that the old lady was in was used even less. People who have laid in it complained of nightmares where they hear screams and laughter of angry children. I guess some restless spirit called dibs on that particular bed, and Demi would very much like it to pick somewhere else to hold court. Please and thanks. In third place, we have the case of purple scrubs. Former EMT David O'Keefe worked mainly in transfers, and this particular client was always his last one of the day, having to return home late at night in the dark. She was an older woman who visited the hospital he was based out of for regular dialysis treatment. One specific day, she was being moved, and David was sitting in the back of the transport vehicle with her. She looked under the weather, so he asked what was wrong out of concern, and she said a man in purple had been visiting her. He asked if the man was, like a relative or a technician, but she shook her head. She said the man would sit next to her during dialysis appointments and stroke her hair. Thinking this was strange, right after he dropped her off at the hospital, David asked the hospital techs about, such a person, but no one had seen or remembered anyone wearing purple. Visitors also weren't really a thing at this part of the hospital, so he assumed the patient was just imagining it. While he was waiting to bring her back home, he saw the man in purple scrubs waiting outside that woman's room, watching her door. As David went to approach him, a bunch of tech personnel urgently ran past them into the woman's room, and David lost sight of the man. It turned out the woman in the room had suffered a heart attack and was sadly unable to be revived. Oh, and just a tiny creepy footnote, none of the staff in that hospital wore purple scrubs. In second place, we have a mystery mimic. Yeah, I'm fond of alliteration. How can you tell? This spooky story comes to us courtesy of former late night transportation worker Betty. She worked the position for a few years, but after this incident, did everything possible to never work a nighttime shift ever again. The transport home base was in the basement of the hospital, where all laundry was done and all supplies were sorted and housed. On this particular night, Betty was the only one in the basement when she heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator, and poked her head around the corner expecting to see her only coworker on duty that night, but there was absolutely no one there. And so, she shrugged it off. That night in particular was slower in pace, so she opted to take a snack break and veg in the break room for a bit, when she heard a loud bang out of nowhere. Betty walked into the hallway and a bed was rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides of the walls. Now at this point, she assumed that her coworker was playing a prank on her, and she directly radioed him to chew him out, but he swore he was upstairs. Honestly, I'd be assuming the same. I've had a similar situation in a haunted house I used to work in at an old theater, but Betty was smart about it and determined to catch her coworker in the act. She started walking down the hallway, and as she passed the laundry room, all the machines started up. She poked her head in, expecting to find him, but the room was completely empty. Just a tiny worrisome spooky flag. Nothing to worry about, right? As she walked into the laundry room, the machines came to a complete stop. Betty froze at first before regaining her senses and making her way towards the elevator, when she heard whistling from the other end of the hall. Now at this point, she's certain that she's the only worker in the basement and is repeatedly pressing the elevator buttons in an attempt to rush it. As she was waiting for the elevator, things started falling off the shelves down the hall. Betty could only stare in shock as boxes of gloves, tissues, and packages of tubes fell off various racks one by one. Her entire body broke out in goosebumps, every hair standing on its end, and the feeling of being watched had completely consumed her thoughts. When the elevator finally arrived after what seemed like forever, Betty felt the sensation of someone brushing her arm and screamed in panic. Upon exiting the elevator upstairs, she made a beeline for the cafeteria, where her coworker actually was, and broke down explaining the entire ordeal. Now, before y'all ask, but Alexa, how was this spirit a mimic? Turns out that Betty usually whistles to herself at work at night, chats with the laundry folks during daytime shifts, and the items that fell off the shelf slowly were common items that she would have to retrieve. Big note for me on this one. In first place, we have terrified security staff. Security guard Mason claims that while he wants his location to stay anonymous, he used to work overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the USA. He and his fellow security officers all have stories about one building in particular, which was built in the late 1800s and was the original psychiatric building for this hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders at that time. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. Sadly, with what we all know about history, when you combine the two, that spells out a lot of nightmares. A couple years before Mason started working security there, this building in particular had been converted partially into offices after the newly built part of the hospital had dedicated a section for the updated psych ward. Mason's rounds for the first night of our tale happened to include, yep, you guessed it, that building. At night, this building was empty, due to most of the staff who worked in those offices leaving by 5 p.m. every day. Apparently some folks like to rush home, which is fair, but they would leave their office doors unlocked, which was a big no-no, due to medical information being located in their offices. Big confidential stuff. Kinda want to keep that locked up. It was security's job to go to each floor, make sure every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it themselves. Mason did his initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear of people, and then proceeded to do door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so he could check both sides of the hallway's doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end, so you had to come back out, go the other way. He noticed everything was secure, so he was ready to move on to the next floor. He exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead-end office and froze at what he saw. Every door that he had already checked was completely ajar, and set so perfectly so that their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again. A single wheelchair had appeared at the end of the hallway and was facing towards the steps. Mason had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to the strange stuff that was happening, but he originally laughed it off until that night. He went around and forced the now open door shut and tried to shrug it off. Nothing else weird happened that night, and he returned the next night to patrol the miners' ward. The area was just under construction, so security was needed to make sure nobody got hurt by accident and all the workers were doing their job. Safety first. When Mason was hanging out in the break room before his shift officially started, other security guards were discussing various reports of seeing a young human with brown hair who would disappear randomly, and Mason dismissed this as just gossip meant to spook off the newbies. An hour into making his rounds, a foreman who had stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because, quote, a youngin' with brown hair had locked himself in a room and he didn't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there. Mason answered the call, went and unlocked the door for the foreman, and looked in a 20 by 8 room for about 10 minutes, and upon seeing no one, called it in as a false alarm. He attempted to shrug it off until he received a call for backup in the psych ward, and when he arrived, he noticed the patient was in a state of panic near the remnants of a shattered chandelier. Now, before he had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, Mason claims he would have written off his testimony as idiocy. But the patient claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move and scrambled out of the way before it hit him. Now, this was the beginning of the end for Mason, who requested to be transferred to hospitals the next day. And as much as I love the Phantom of the Opera, I don't really want it to become reality. One of my favorite things to say in accordance with that is that I love one fictional toxic tenor, and only one. Emphasis on fictional.
Coming at number 5, we've got Gonjiam Asylum. Like many famously haunted places, this one is scary and well known enough to spawn a feature film, and a pretty darn good one too. Like legitimately scary with plenty of twists and a wicked premise. But beyond the scary flick, which is a whole lot of movie magic and quality pacing, we've got an actual ghost story to look at. Many believe this asylum to be one of the most haunted locations in South Korea, and it attracts all sorts of thrill seekers. Let's just hope their stories end up a little better than those in the movie, right? No guarantees. The tales surrounding this abandoned hospital are varied and plentiful, painting many a vivid picture of doom and terror. Most of the time, they don't really line up with each other either. This hasn't stopped the rumors from proliferating though. If anything, the huge spread of stories and legends have increased Gonjiam's notoriety. The most common thing to hear about is that its patients started dying mysterious deaths one day, and the number of fatalities rose quite quickly. Nobody could explain why this was the case unless they were paranormal deaths. Terrible treatment and tragic deaths leading to the creation of ghosts, phantoms, and demons. The imbuing of a dark, evil energy at the place where so many had lost their minds and lives. As time went on, more stories escaped the facility, including the owner of the asylum being a murderous psychopath himself. He would keep people there against their will, regardless of whether their treatment was working or not. From time to time, this owner would kill a patient just for fun while keeping the others to be tortured. Only those who made daring escapes would survive to tell this story. Then there were whispers of doctors becoming just as unhinged as their patients, performing dangerous experiments and doing horrible things to those in their care. The more things became unhinged, the more cursed energy seemed to collect in the building. Now, if we're being honest, the real reason the asylum shut down has nothing to do with these activities, although a sewage problem could be a convenient cover-up for all the insanity behind closed doors. Coming in number 4, we've got the Rolling Hills Asylum. Sounds really pleasant and picturesque, right? Rolling hills evoke an image of calm, breezy stretches of road, some tall grass blowing in the wind, yeah? Well, that might be how they sold this asylum to prospective patients and their families, but the reality of life here is far from the pastoral charm implied by the name. And it didn't really start as an asylum either. It was more of a place for all sorts of unsavory characters to be collected to ensure they didn't cause any problems for more upstanding members of society. Definitely not a way for the rich to put all the people they didn't want to think about in one convenient location away. Of course, when you put all sorts of poor, sick, and mentally ill people in a cramped place and just sort of leave them there, things don't improve at a great speed. The opposite, if you can believe it. There were almost 2,000 recorded deaths here, but that does seem to be a bit of an underestimate. As is the case with plenty of spots like this, all sorts of undocumented deaths did occur, and it's said that there are hundreds of unmarked and unaccounted for graves on the site. The result of all this death, overcrowding, and lunacy is a legacy of ghosts and demons. Rolling Hills is well known for paranormal activity these days and attracts a fair deal of enthusiasts quite often. In fact, there are all sorts of ghost tours offered to those who don't think sneaking into a haunted asylum is a good idea. People have reported hearing blood-curdling screams throughout the location and have seen doors slam without anyone around to do so. There's also the famed Shadow Hallway, a stretch of corridor that is said to host a whole squad of shadowy apparitions. Walking down this hall, you might see a figure peeking out from around the corner, or maybe you'll witness a looming presence gliding along, looking for something it'll never find. And who could forget dear Roy Krause, the tallest ghost most folks have ever seen? He lived his life as a 7'5" phenom, and now his phantom stands just as tall. Coming in number 3, we've got Trans-Allegheny. Overcrowding seems to be a universal problem when it comes to places meant for society's undesirables. We'll happily build a place to hide away folks who don't fit the mold, but then we decide there are more odd folks than ever and don't accommodate. It's a problem with prisons now, and was a problem with mental asylums back in the day. Trans-Allegheny is a particularly well-known haunted asylum for a multitude of reasons. This enormous building made out of hand-cut stone is something straight out of a nightmare. Urban explorers salivate at the thought of exploring a location like this, and for good reason. The asylum was built to house about 250 people. How many ended up crammed into the location though? Take a wild guess. Go ahead. Are you locked in your answer? Good. They ended up funneling over 2,400 people here, over 10 times capacity. You can imagine how this went and what might have happened to those living in this overstuffed hellhole. And it wasn't just the overcrowding that caused problems. The staff here did all sorts of heinous things to the many folks stuck inside, often getting away with it because of the general namelessness of things in a 10 times capacity asylum. Ice pick lobotomies, rusty cages and chains, you name it. The result was despicable, and years later we still see ghosts. Coming in number 2, we've got the Danvers Lunatic Asylum. This one straight up looks like a haunted castle, which is a great start. The death, debauchery, and general disdain for human life and sanctity almost guarantees that it remains haunted too. Like most asylums, before the idea of mental health was really dreamt up, Danvers was a place of blood and brutality, abuse and archaic treatments, chaos and crisis. It opened with the intention of housing and treating mentally unstable criminals. Treatments back in the day were less than effective though. Shock therapy and lobotomies were the favorites of doctors here, which, surprise, surprise, just hurt the criminals more. And after a while, it was decided that Danvers wouldn't just be a place for mentally unstable criminals. They'd toss anyone in there. This saw an influx of mentally stable felons, alcoholics, and handicapped folks, all to be treated the same as the folks who were there first. Uh-oh. Nobody seemed to alter their methods to account for these new patients and inmates though, and the result was horrid. Eventually, the staff couldn't keep up with all the new people, and many people died. Some bodies were left to rot for extended periods of time because people passed away and nobody was looking for them. This, of course, led to all sorts of myths and legends about mysterious ghosts and spirits. Coming in at number 1, we've got Sanatorium. Also known as the Fool's Tower, this cylindrical building in Vienna was once the earliest mental asylum in Europe. Here they kept all sorts of folks deemed unfit for public life, and doctors performed a plethora of experiments upon them. Over time, this use would be phased out and a new, interesting, and morbid purpose would be found. It now houses the Pathological Anatomical Museum. Educational and terrifying. See, the contents of this museum are gruesome to say the least. They have a wide variety of physical abnormalities preserved in containers of formaldehyde. So if you ever wanted to see an abnormality hacked off a human and put into a jar like some sort of mad scientist's hidden cellar, this is the place. They've also got a collection of replicas of body parts made out of wax. Doesn't sound like a horror movie in the making. So, from an asylum to a place displaying the most wild and weird ways the human body can become deformed, we've got it all at Sanatorium. Not for the faint of heart or weak of stomach. I can hear the scratch of pen on paper as folks update their bucket lists already. These are definitely visitable, but who would want to see all this, right?